The midweek national lottery draw with Lottery Extra just half an hour away on BBC1 after green peppers take on red tomatoes. So now on BBC1, just what we need. Waiting for your call. This is BBC1.
Also tonight, an actor, director, musician and poet, an all-round star gets the big red book treatment in This Is Your Life in half an hour. First on BBC1, it's Happy Birthday Phil, although you wouldn't know it. A difference of opinion gets a bit out of hand, temper tantrums in changing rooms in 35 minutes, and then a wedding under threat. 2,000 Acres of Sky concludes at 9:10 here on BBC1. The real-life space drama that had the world on the edge of its seat now on BBC1. Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon star in Apollo 13. Weather View now on BBC1 from Sarah Wilmshurst.
An update of the news now on BBC1 with George Alagaya.
The news and sport now on BBC1 with George Alagaya and Mary Rhodes. With Robbie Keane and Teddy Sheringham, a question of sport at midnight here on BBC1. A thriller of a movie, A Climate for Killing on BBC1 in a few minutes after the weather with Isabel Lang.
Your points of view now on BBC1 with Terry Wogan. The news now on BBC1 with George Alagaya.
A question of loyalties in Rebel Heart on BBC1 tonight at 9:10 after a birthday surprise in Monarch of the Glen. Tough drama now on BBC1 on the run for their lives in the concluding episode of Rebel Heart. Here on BBC1 now, the news and sport with George Alagaya and Mary Rhodes. It's 10 o'clock.
A powerful lineup now on BBC1, but who's in charge? So now on BBC1, interrogation time, and who's it going to be? Tonight and tomorrow on BBC1, The Crime Double starring Clive Owen, and a new investigation, Murder in Focus with Second Sight.
So now on BBC1, another happy birthday in Albert Square. And a new series now on BBC1 as angry consumers fight back. Get Me, the Manager.
Grab your duffel coat and curly wig. The Jonathan Creek Fan Club meet in 50 minutes here on BBC1.
A gambling addiction threatens to bankrupt the McDonald's. Sunday night is Glen Bogle night here on BBC1. Monarch of the Glen continues at 5 to 8. Saying a final goodbye to Compo. It's last of the summer wine here on BBC1 in 35 minutes after Songs of Praise with Diane Louise Jordan.
And before that on BBC1, Heartache in Albert Square.
Now on BBC1, Michael's Up Close.
Full of surprises, This Is Your Life with Michael Aspel in half an hour here on BBC1.
First on BBC1, Watchdog with Nikki Campbell.
And the build-up begins after the news on BBC1 with Peter Sissons.
What happens when your big day is also your first day? When playing for ratings means playing with emotions. New drama now on BBC1. Love or money?
BBC1 witnesses the worst of Britain's high-speed police chases. Hot pursuit, a car war.
And after tonight's Parkinson, Freddie Mercury, The Untold Story, is at 11:15. On BBC1 now, the news and sport with George Alagaya and Mary Rhodes. reliving life on board the Galaxy with the cruise on BBC1 in an hour after Kirk Douglas on the Heaven and Earth show.
So it's all in the mind now on BBC1 to kick off a new series of Tomorrow's World Live.
Right. BBC1 rocks catch Lenny Kravitz on Friday nights with Jonathan Ross at 10:35. Before that, before the topical humour of Dead Ringers comes to BBC1.
And later tonight, Jasper Carrot and Meera Syal star in new comedy All About Me. That's at 8:30 here on BBC1. Adjusting to life in the Trench, BBC2's major news series continues in a couple of minutes. And this is BBC1.
You're watching BBC1 with John Craven exploring the issues in this week's Country File.
Back to this morning on BBC1, people to meet and stories to tell now, with Matthew Kelly at City Hospital.
This is BBC1 and we're running just over 20 minutes later than planned due to a major power failure earlier here at Television Centre. Many apologies for that. So now, strong language in a disturbing family tale. Widow's Kiss.
Dicing with danger. Has Mark pushed things too far? EastEnders in half an hour. First on BBC1, celebs take the TV test.
Now on BBC1, the news in London and the South East with Jules Botfield.
BBC1 keeping you up to date through the night now with BBC News 24.
Now on BBC1, we head to the Cenotaph in London's Whitehall for this year's Act of Remembrance.
So now a new series for BBC1, the return of Paul Kenyon. Celebrating happy anniversaries on BBC1 now, but they're not married. Well, not to each other anyway. Strong language in same time next year. And that's because now on BBC1, Jonathan Ross introduces a tribute to George Harrison.
The news now on BBC1 with Peter Sissons.
Now though on BBC1, the inside story of the Selby train crash. The programme briefly includes strong language.
This is BBC1, now the news with Michael Burke. It's 10 o'clock. You can't beat a good old-fashioned hero, and Harrison Ford proves that point now, continuing BBC1's Thursday night thrills and spills Indiana Jones trilogy, The Temple of Doom. Phil's about to put a spanner in the works for Jamie, and he's planning a few other surprises too. EastEnders is on BBC1 in half an hour.
The Six Nations tournament starts tomorrow on BBC1 in Grandstand at 1. Right now, John Inverdale meets Bill McLaren, the BBC's voice of rugby.
War veterans still haunted by the past, Edward Woodward and Christopher Plummer star now in a powerful new BBC1 drama. Strong language and some scenes you may find disturbing. In Night Flight.
This is BBC1, now on the record with John Humphreys.
Live Six Nations Rugby. Ireland take on Wales this afternoon. Coverage starts in 25 minutes on BBC2. Here on BBC1, we're off to sunny Spain.
Uncovering jewellery probably worn at the court of Napoleon. The Antiques Roadshow in Devon in half an hour on BBC1. Playing the Field continues at 9 on BBC1. Now Michael Aspel and the Antiques Roadshow.
And before all of that, steering into trouble on BBC1, this bunch are off their trolley. On BBC1 now, York Minster's the setting for this week's Songs of Praise.
Should we know more about where the food we buy comes from? Country File investigates at 11:30 here on BBC1. The final part of Stig of the Dump on BBC1 in 35 minutes. Now, Songs of Praise with Sally Magnuson.
Now, Janine's gotta face facts. EastEnders in a moment. First, have you seen BBC One's new drama, Rescue Me? Big-time complicated love lives. It continues Sunday nights at 9. And here's a taste.
A routine cave rescue becomes complicated at 7:25. Drama in Rockface on BBC One. That's in half an hour after Tomorrow's World. BBC One on the trail of a former. See who walks away with this year's Oscars. Live coverage of the 74th Annual Academy Awards begins tonight at 12:45 over on BBC2. Here on BBC One now, a multi-Oscar-winning blockbuster. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet star in Titanic.
So now on BBC One, the staff of Holby City gets emotionally involved. This is BBC One with powerful drama based on true events set in a fictitious location in rural Ireland in the 1960s, telling the story of the Magdalen laundries, Sinners. On BBC One now, the concluding parts of powerful drama, Sinners. Emotional choices in film drama Sin and Redemption at midnight. First on BBC One, Booze with Jeremy Bowen.
And later tonight, the length some creatures will go to stay alive. It's Weird Nature here on BBC One at 8:30. And tonight's Crime Watch reconstructs the last known movements of missing teenager Amanda Dowler. That's at 9 o'clock here on BBC One. Stomach-churning stuff first on BBC One, and a great advert for home cooking. Crime Watch UK will be asking for your help again in half an hour. First on BBC One, it's all about camouflage, staying hidden to stay alive. Weird Nature. The news at 10 o'clock now on BBC One with Peter Sissons and Jules Botfield. But now on BBC One, back to the Crime Watch studio for an update from Nick Ross and Fiona Bruce. A change to tonight's lineup now on BBC One. Living with Disfigurement Scar Stories is now later than billed at 11:45. And that's because of an extra question time with David Dimbleby. Some changes tonight here on BBC One. The late film Brubaker will now be shown at a later date. In its place, Coast to Coast is now at 12:35. But before that, accidental or deliberate, behind the scar, there's a story. A change to the scheduled film now on BBC One. Brubaker will now be shown at a later date. In its place, A Wife on the Run, Coast to Coast. It's now on BBC One with Helen Willett. Through the night now on BBC One with BBC News 24.